I want you to picture a wedding. It's May 1988, Manila Cathedral. The kind of ceremony that feels almost like a coronation.
Right. You've got the massive stone arches, the incense, the families all dressed up. It's the perfect start.
Exactly. But in the story we're covering today, that perfect start, well, it leads to a very strange place. The door closes on the wedding night, and then just nothing happens.
And you don't just mean for one night because they were exhausted from the reception?
No, I mean, nothing happens for 10 months.
Wow. 10 months sleeping in the same bed, living in the same room.
And having zero sexual intimacy. Not one single time. So today we are diving into a case that sounds like a tabloid scandal, but it's actually a landmark decision from the Supreme Court of the Philippines. We're talking about Ming versus the Court of Appeals.
This is a classic case, and for good reason. It forces the legal system to walk right into the bedroom and ask a really uncomfortable question.
Which is
a marriage without sex actually a marriage at all?
we tend to think of marriage as, a contract about property, kids, companionship. But this decision argues that there's a biological and even a spiritual baseline that if you don't meet it, the whole thing is just void. We're going to unpack this idea of the ungiven self.
It's such a fascinating phrase, isn't it? The court had to figure out if refusing to be intimate is just a weird quirk, like, I don't know, refusing to do the dishes, or if it's a form of psychological incapacity that just erases the marriage.
We've got the court records, the medical reports, which get surprisingly graphic,
Yeah.
and the final decision. So let's go back. It's 1988. Our couple, Ming Tsoi and Gina Tsoi.
And on paper, they look perfect for each other. Similar social standing, both young, healthy. They get married on May 22nd.
The script is playing out just as it should. They have a big reception, and then they go to the husband's mother's house where they're going to live.
And the expectation, of course, is that this is when the marriage is consummated.
Right. It's a legal expectation. But Gina testifies that her new husband just gets into bed, turns his back to her, and goes to sleep.
Okay, so night one, you could maybe write that off. Nerves, fatigue, too much to drink, it happens.
Sure. But then night 2 is the same story. Night 3, night 4, he's actively avoiding her.
And this leads to what has to be the most bizarre honeymoon story I have ever come across in a legal case. They decide to go to Baguio City.
For anyone who doesn't know, Baguio is the classic honeymoon spot in the Philippines. It's up in the mountains, it's cool, romantic, it's a place you go to connect.
So you'd think they'd go to be alone, but Ming Tsoi, he brings his mother?
It was worse than that. He invites his mother and uncle, his mother, so the grandmother is there, and a nephew.
That's not a honeymoon, that's a family reunion.
It's like a human Bucker zone. If you're trying to spark intimacy, bringing your entire extended family along feels like a very deliberate act of self-sabotage.
It screams that intimacy wasn't just a low priority, it was something to be actively prevented.
The wife's testimony about this trip is it's so awkward. She talks about siesta time, that afternoon rest period. For newlyweds, that's prime time for privacy. But she says he would just vanish, go for long walks.
Or, and this is the detail that the court really focused on, he would sleep in a rocking chair in the living room.
Can you just picture that? Your new wife is in a comfortable bed in the next room, and you choose to curl up in a rocking chair with your family nearby. It paints such a clear picture.
It's a pattern of total avoidance, and this went on from May 1988 to March 1989 for 10 months. Gina claims that in all that time, she never even saw his private parts.
So, of course, the marriage falls apart. Gina files for an annulment. But here's the thing about Philippine law that's so important here.
Yeah.
You can't just get a divorce.
Exactly. You have to prove the marriage was void from the very beginning. You have to prove psychological incapacity under Article 36 of the Family Code.
Which means she had to prove he was mentally or psychologically unable to fulfill the basic duties of a husband. And this is where it turns into a massive he said, she said.
Right. Gina had her own theory. She didn't think he was just shy. She flat out argued that he was impotent or closet homosexual.
And she brought up some very specific things to try and prove that.
Yeah, she testified that she saw him using an eyebrow pencil and his mother's cleansing cream.
Which, okay, today, a guy using skincare products doesn't really mean anything about his sexuality.
Of course not. But we have to see it through the lens of 1988 and the case she was building. She was trying to paint a picture of a man with zero interest in women. She even argued he only married her, a Filipino citizen, to keep his residency status.
So in her view, the whole thing was a fraud. But we have to be fair to the husband's side of the story.
And he fought this. He didn't want the annulment. He insisted that he loved her.
He admitted there was no sex, but he had a completely different reason why.
He flipped the whole narrative. He said she was the one who was resisting him. He testified that whenever he tried to caress her, she'd push his hands away.
He even described one specific attempt.
Yes, he claimed he tried to force the issue once, but she was shaking and seemed so against it that he stopped.
And he framed that as him being respectful.
Exactly. He said, I stopped because I didn't want to hurt her. He painted himself as this patient, caring husband waiting for his wife to get comfortable. He even suggested she only filed the case because she didn't want to give his mother's jewelry back.
So you have two realities that just cannot coexist. She says he's hiding in a rocking chair. He says she's trembling if he touches her. How does a court even begin to sort that out?
Well, because the allegation involved impotency, the court did something drastic. It ordered medical exams.
And this is where it gets incredibly clinical and, frankly, intrusive.
It is. The state basically mandated that they give up all their privacy to solve this legal question. Both of them had to go through physical examinations.
The wife's results came back first. The doctors found she was healthy, normal, and, this is the crucial part, still a virgin.
That's a huge piece of evidence. It's objective proof that the no sex part of the story is real. It's a fact.
But the husband's exam, that's where things got really complicated for the wife's legal team. He was examined by a urologist to see if he was physically impotent. Does the equipment actually work?
And the report is, well, it's very detailed. The doctor testified that he asked the husband to masturbate right there in the clinic.
Wow. I can't imagine the pressure. Please demonstrate your virility for the court record.
And the finding was tricky. The doctor reported the husband's penis lengthened from 2 inches to 3 inches. He called it a soft erection.
A soft erection. That doesn't exactly sound like a ringing endorsement.
It's not a full erection, no. But, and this is the absolute pivot point of the case, the doctor concluded there was no evidence of impotency. He said that while it wasn't rigid, the husband was technically capable of intercourse.
Okay, so that's a huge problem for the wife's case, isn't it? If the law demands incapacity, but the expert says he can do it, doesn't the husband just win?
That's the trap. If you view marriage as just a mechanical act, then yeah, the case is over. But the court had to ask a much deeper question. If a person can perform the act but simply won't, for no good reason, for months on end, does that count as incapacity?
So before they could even get to that legal question, they had to decide who was telling the truth about the refusal, the husband or the wife.
And the Supreme Court, just like the lower courts, they believed the wife. Their reasoning was fascinating, and it's very rooted in culture. They relied on this concept of the innate modesty of the Filipino woman.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that mean?
The justices basically argued, why would a woman from a conservative culture put herself through this kind of public humiliation if it wasn't true? Why would she go on record saying she's a virgin and her husband won't touch her, opening herself up to all that gossip and shame?
So the very act of being publicly shamed was proof that she was telling the truth.
Exactly. The court felt that the pain of that admission was so high, it had to be true. They also completely took apart the husband's story about being respectful.
Right. They didn't buy that he was just being sympathetic for 10 months.
Not for a second. The court found it unbelievable. They said, look, if you really loved her and were physically able, you wouldn't just accept a sexless marriage from day one. You'd do something.
If your partner is terrified of intimacy, you talk to them. You see a doctor, you get counseling. You don't just go sleep in the living room for a year.
Precisely. The court saw a total lack of empathy from him. He never even tried to figure out what was wrong. And this all leads to the core legal idea from this case. The court looked at Article 36 and came up with a new standard. Senseless and protracted refusal.
Let's unpack that. Senseless and protracted.
It was senseless because a medical exam proved he was physically capable, there was no good reason for it, and it was protracted because it just went on and on for 10 months.
So even though the parts worked, the fact that he refused to use them consistently meant he had a psychological inability to be a husband.
Yes. The court ruled this wasn't just a choice. It was a symptom, a manifestation of a serious personality disorder. It showed he was just unable to give any real meaning to the marriage.
It's interesting because a lot of people might say, well, maybe they just weren't a good match. But the Supreme Court is saying, no, this goes way deeper than bad chemistry.
They're saying the refusal to perform this essential marital duty when there's no excuse, it voids the entire contract. And this is where the decision goes from being dry legal text to something almost philosophical.
I was really struck by how much they focused on procreation. It feels very traditional.
It is. The decision says procreation is the basic end of marriage, a universal principle. So if you're not even trying to cooperate sexually, you're blocking the very purpose of the institution in the eyes of the law.
But they didn't just stop at biology, did they? They talked about intimacy itself in this almost poetic way.
That's the part that really stands out. The court says, love is useless unless it is shared.
Love is useless unless it is shared. I mean, that's a profound statement to find in a Supreme Court ruling.
It really is. It frames their whole argument. They go on to say an ungiven self is an unfulfilled self.
The ungiven self, that's the core of it. What did the court mean by that?
They're describing an egoist, someone who keeps themselves locked away. In a marriage, you're supposed to give yourself to the other person. The court defines marriage as a deep sense of spiritual communion, and they argue that sexual intimacy is the physical expression of that communion. It creates wholeness and oneness.
So, by turning his back, sleeping in the rocking chair, bringing his uncle on the honeymoon, the husband wasn't just failing at a task, he was denying the very essence of the marriage.
Exactly. The court called his behavior a constant non-fulfillment that destroys the integrity of the marriage. It's not about the act itself, but the spontaneous mutual affection behind it. If you treat your partner with that much coldness, you're not really married.
It totally reframes the whole idea of a roommate marriage. People joke about that, but the Supreme Court of the Philippines is essentially saying if that refusal is senseless and goes on long enough, you might not have a valid marriage at all.
It establishes that marriage requires an expressive interest in your partner's feelings. And they saw his defense of, I respected her too much, as a total failure of that interest. It was interpreted as, you just didn't care enough to even try to connect.
Which is a harsh judgment, but when you look at the facts, 10 months of nothing, you can see how they got there.
For sure. A loving husband would have been looking for a solution, not just accepting a sexless life from the very beginning.
So in the end, the court sided with the knife.
They did. The marriage was declared void ab initio, void from the beginning.
So legally, it's as if that big wedding in the Manila Cathedral just never happened.
Correct. Because that psychological incapacity, that ungiven self, was presumed to have been there all along. The 10 months of avoidance were just the proof.
This case sets such a huge precedent. It says physical ability isn't the whole story. You can have the biology of a partner, but if you don't have the will to be a partner, the law says you aren't one.
It gave an out to people who were trapped in these marriages that looked perfect on paper but were completely hollow on the inside.
It validates the idea that intimacy is a non-negotiable part of the marital contract.
And it reminds us that incapacity can be subtle. It's not always about a dramatic mental illness. It can be a personality that is simply unable to give what a marriage requires.
The ungiven self. It's such a powerful phrase. The egoist has nothing but himself.
It really raises the bar. It's not just about showing up, it's about showing yourself.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this? I think we often see marriage laws as these rigid, old-fashioned things. But here, you see the court actually trying to protect a fundamental human need for connection.
It serves as a great reminder that the law, at its best, really does try to understand human nature. It recognizes that a partnership without intimacy is just incomplete.
I want to leave you with one final thought today. The court said quite beautifully that love is useless unless it is shared. In this case, a total lack of intimacy from day one voided the marriage. But it makes you wonder, if the physical act is so central to the union, what about a marriage that just loses that intimacy over time? Does it slowly drift into that same territory of the ungiven self?
That is the question, isn't it?
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.